It was Friday, February 20th, 1959. And here's what happened in your world today. This morning, Prime Minister John Diefenbaker reached a decision behind closed doors and announced the cancellation of the Arrow and Iroquois project before the House of Commons at 11 a.m. At 11:20 this morning, the 14,525 workers employed by the Avro Arrow Company were laid off. This was a shot seen as Defense Minister George Pierce had repeatedly given assurance to Avro management that the program would not be cancelled but rather reassessed in March. We've decided to devote tonight's broadcast to the Avro Project to remember what seemed to be the stepping stone for Canada into the high-tech age of aerial defense. The Avro Project was born out of the Korean War. Canada had the third largest air force in the world, so the ideas of having a world-class interceptor seemed to be closer than expected. Canada had just finished a period of unbelievable growth, and plants were built everywhere. One example was the Victory Aircraft plant in Malton, Ontario, which was located just outside of Toronto. This plant was bought by a British company and renamed Avro Canada. This factory was the building site for the Lancaster bombers during the Second World War. This plant would build the CF-100 Canuck fighter, which was an Avro success. 692 Canucks were built and 53 sold to Belgium. The problem with the Canuck was that the Soviet bombers were faster and the Canuck would not be able to keep up with them. This led to the creation of certain specifications by the RCAF called Air 73. Air 73 called for a twin-engine, two-seat fighter capable to fly at Mach 1.5 in all types of weather. These certain specifications were met with Project CF-105. The Avro Arrow was born. There were no prototypes of the Arrow because of the threat of Soviet spies. Therefore, extensive testing had to be done with the use of wind tunnels. The engine for the Arrow would be made by Iroquois Engines, which is part of the Avro Company. The engine would be an Orenda PS-13 Iroquois, which was said to permanently deafen a person at 100 meters and may even kill at a closer distance. The engine could produce 8,720 kilograms of dry thrust and 11,800 kilograms with afterburner. The Orenda used expensive but lightweight metal called titanium, which made the weight-to-thrust ratio of the Iroquois the most powerful on the North American continent and was said to be fuel efficient. The development for the engine was less than $90 million, which was considered to be inexpensive. The complex and expensive radar and fire control systems ended up being one of the reasons for the cancellation. The Arrow was intended to use only missiles, and they would be stored in huge internal missile bays, which would not only protect the missiles, but also reduce drag. Besides being a wonderful aircraft, the Arrow was accompanied by a large political struggle. In December of 1953, after the model of the CF-105 was created, Prime Minister St. Lawrence government awarded a $27 million contract to Avro because the specifications met for this plane were found in no other aircraft in the world. Previous to 1954, the Arrow led a sort of underground existence. It was after the Soviets tested the H-bomb and introduced the Bison jet bomber, which opened the possibility of a bomber gap, which led to the program being stepped up. In March 1955, the contract was increased to $260 million. In September 1955, Avro told Cabinet they would need $56 million to keep the project on schedule. It was at this time when most of the military establishments in the Western Alliance brought to the surface that the era of the interceptor jet was over, and the age of guided missiles would soon be obsolete. In 1955, the marketing to other countries, specifically Britain and the United States, was unsuccessful because those countries almost never bought foreign aircraft. In 1956, the Avro Company would need to create a new radar system, seen as the original radar system didn't meet RCAF standards. This, along with the cancellation of the U.S. Sparrow II missiles, would push the Arrow over the budget. In 1955, there was evidence that the Liberals were losing faith in the Arrow, but were not going to cancel the popular program in an election year. To many, the surprising outcome of that election was that Diefenbaker's Conservatives won a minority government which, in August of 1957, signed on to NORAD, which would force Canada to integrate their air defense with the U.S., which meant using Bomark missiles. These new weapons, plus the cost of the Arrow Project, made many Canadians feel the threat from a manned bomber was decreasing. On October 12, 1957, the Arrow was unveiled to 12,000 people of the admiring public outside the Malton plant. Except, on that day, the Soviets released their Sputnik 1 satellite, which stole the headlines from the Arrow. After many elaborate tests, including engine ground running tests, low-speed taxi trials, and high-speed taxi trials, and many hours in the most advanced simulator in Canada, the Arrow was ready for takeoff. Just before 10 a.m. on March 25, 1958, the Arrow took its maiden voyage, piloted by Jan Zurakowski. At 9:51 a.m., the Arrow lifted off the ground about halfway down the 6,000-meter runway. The flight lasted for 35 minutes and was very successful. On August 23, 1958, the Arrow was taken to supersonic speeds for the first time. It reached speeds of up to Mach 1.7. 6 days after the first flight, on March 31, 1958, the Conservatives won the largest electoral victory in Canadian history. The Conservatives were in a position to do what they wanted, and they wanted to scrap the expensive project. In 1958, the government purchased 100 U.S.-built interceptors at $2 million each, along with 2 Bomark missile installations. This leads us to today, February 20th, 1959, when the Arrow program was cancelled and all Arrows ordered to be scrapped and the blueprints burned. No doubt today will be labeled as Black Friday, as we have lost one of our great accomplishments as a nation. Good night, Canada, and have a great weekend.